is non-violence or non-existent. That is where we are.
Welcome to An Outside View. I'm your host, Dick Zaccaro, and joining me tonight I have the pleasure of being with Chip Faulkner, who is the Associate Director of Citizens for Limited Taxation. Chip, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Dick.
Tonight's topic will be about the high residential and commercial rates in our city, and I'm sure all over the state as well. And you've been doing this for 30 years. We all know Barbara Anderson. She's a household name. So if you could give the viewers a quick couple minutes of your background, how you got involved with the effort, and then maybe enlighten us what our community can do here to help repeal our high taxes. And after you open up with that, I'll give you some facts of what's going on in our city.
Should I first tell you why I'm wearing this shirt?
Yeah, I noticed that when you came in. That's a very interesting shirt there. Why don't you tell the people what that's about?
Usually I have a shirt and tie, but someone gave this to me about 6 months ago. I gave a speech at a Tea Party rally, and someone gave me a shirt, a little golf shirt type thing, and actually the logo was sort of faded, but it shows Paul Revere on a galloping horse. And underneath it, it says, "The voters are coming. The voters are coming."
Right.
Which is, you know, more or less a Tea Party attitude.
Right.
The voters are coming in November.
Yeah.
And so I've decided to wear that as kind of hopefully a good luck charm till
So
November.
by land, two lands, by sea, one, or something like that, right?
Yep.
Well, great. So give us a little background how you got involved.
Sure. Well, I was actually a teacher in New York City, and I moved back to the area. I grew up in this area in Norfolk, and I collected some signatures on a petition drive for a fellow named Don Fetter. So when they had a staff position open at Citizens for Limited Taxation, they interviewed me for the job, and I got it, and I said, I'll give it 6 months, see if I like it. And it's been 30 years.
Wow.
And we were immediately thrown into a signature drive to get signatures for Prop 2.5 battle.
Right.
And we made that, but people forget, we only made the signatures. We needed roughly 60,000. We only made it by about 400 or 500.
Wow.
And thank God we made it, because we were able to get it on the ballot. And, you know, most of the polling showed that we were either behind or maybe 50-50, but most polls showed us losing by 4 or 5 points. However, there was a big block of undecided voters, about 18 to 20%. And on election day, virtually that entire undecided vote went for Prop 2.5. And that's why your property taxes, even though they may be high, would be double if it weren't for Prop 2.5.
Right.
And the reason I say that, people say, well, you're just making this up. We tracked the property tax increases in the state 10 to 15 years before Prop 2.5. And at the rate they were going, there was no stopping them. And unless we had 2.5 in 1980, they would have continued to grow, and you'd be paying huge property taxes. Plus the auto excise, which at that time was $66 a thousand. It's now $25. So whatever your auto excise is, if it's $100, you'd be paying $200, $250 if it weren't for Prop 2.5.
Right. And why don't you explain to the viewers what Proposition 2.5 exactly is? Yeah,
what it basically does is it limits, initially it was to bring every community down to 2.5% of assessed valuation. Once they reached that limit, they then, which most communities, by the way, already were at that point when the ballot question passed. Then after it passed, they were only allowed to go up 2.5% on the levy. So if Brockton or Northeastern or Plymouth or whatever they charge in property taxes, which is called the property tax levy, the total amount, they can go up 2.5% on that. The biggest error people make, or the most erroneous impression, is that the 2.5 limit is on valuation. It's not. It's on whatever the city or town raised the year before. They were allowed to go up Prop 2.5 on that amount.
So if your home is, if their number is 100,000 at 2.5, they can't exceed a tax levy of 2,500?
Well, it's on the whole town. It's not on each piece of property.
I see.
So if a town, let's say under the 2.5 law, can raise an extra, let's say 150,000, it's up to the town how to get that increase.
Right.
Theoretically, they could go to one neighborhood get it all out of one neighborhood. Generally, though, they try to spread it out over the whole town.
Excellent. Well, I've done a little homework here, and first of all, we commend you for your efforts, and we thank you for helping keeping the tax rates down for the citizens and residents of Massachusetts, and it's always often referred to as Taxachusetts. But Brocktonians are now, it's my understanding, that they're starting a similar movement called BLTs, like the sandwich, bacon, lettuce, and tomato, and that stands for Brocktonians for Limited Taxation. And I produced a chart here that you have a copy of, and the viewers at home will be able to see the chart too. This chart was produced by the Metro South Chamber of Commerce, and basically what it is, it shows 18 surrounding communities, including Brockton, showing tax rates for both residential, commercial, and the populations of each community. And the viewers will see Brockton highlighted in yellow, as you see on this piece of paper. And I did some math. What I did with those 18 communities is I took an average. So the average of the 18 communities' residential tax rate is $13.70. Brockton's right now is $16.14, so it's a differential. Brockton is higher by $2.44 per thousand than the average of these 18 communities' residential taxes. That means per 100,000, Brocktonians are paying $244 more than the average of the 18 communities. Now on the commercial side, the average is $18.40 of the 18 communities. Brockton's commercial tax rate is $29.96. That's a larger differential of $11.56 that Brocktonian businesses are paying more, Brockton business, excuse me. So per 100,000, that's the equivalent of $1,156 more than the average of these 18 communities. So this movement is starting up. I hear it's gaining a lot of increasing popularity with the people. And some of the facts that I've heard the people and former guests on my show is basically saying government spending is out of control. The City of Brockton's budget is now $316 million. You have more than 244 people, city employees, making well over $100,000 per year in the city. They haven't had any layoffs in fiscal year budget 2013, which I commend them on that, but it is a global recession. People are getting laid off everywhere. They had, interesting enough, they did cut back in the educational budget, the school budget, by reducing some programs, computer programs, some of the text. And now they're voting on the 2013 budget that just passed. I have an article here. And there was a $5 million shortfall, and I'll give you one guess where they're going to make up that $5 million. They're talking about conceivably going up to the residential taxes to nearly $17 per thousand.
And meanwhile, there's probably no talk of reform or cutting benefits or
right.
What you haven't mentioned, and this is the big, elephant in the room, are pensions.
Right.
Pensions are destroying cities and towns.
Absolutely.
Pension costs.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's my next point now. So I'm going to give you some facts right now. More than $25 million is owed to the city pension fund and back appropriations just for the last couple of fiscal years due to poor performance in the investment markets. The city is spending more than $12 million a year of taxpayers' hard-earned money to fund the following enterprises: the 21st Century Corporation, which is a private nonprofit entity that promotes business in Brockton; the Brockton Rocks, who are in default of payment to the city by more than $75,000 on their water bills.
Are they going to have another season? The Brockton Rocks?
They took this year off, and they're going to regroup next year, maybe come back. But Bill Murray and Mike Veck and a couple of the other owners folded tent, and they moved out.
I almost came down to see him when Earl Cam Boyd was pitching.
Right. And Bill Lee pitched the game too and actually won. But there is a collegiate team that's playing there now in their place. Also, the D-cell plant that was earmarked to provide the power plant that never happened because the people were opposed to it. They're producing 2.5 million gallons of water a day that was earmarked for selling to surrounding towns and for the power plant, as again, that never came about. Stonehill College, for the last 7-8 years, the council's saying they're going to reassess their bills tying into our sewage system. They're only paying right now a portion of their bills, but yet they're putting liens on people's homes that are working 3 jobs where their water meters were in default and faulty readings they had. So that's just to give you an idea. And the last thing was the GIC plan. Brockton is a self-pay for their employees, and the mayor and the council debated whether they should join the GIC plan or a similar plan with an adage in volume discounts with numbers that would have saved the city another $6 million. So they're negotiating with the unions now, try to cut costs there. So right off the top, there's $12 million, but yet to fund this $5 million budget shortfall, they're gonna go up on taxes again. Now, it's interesting that the council usually acts unanimous with one another. There was a recent vote taken that was 9-1. There are 12 city councils, by the way, 11, I'm sorry. There are 7 ward councils and 4 at large. So usually they vote in unison on showing some cohesiveness together. They just voted 9-1 in favor. One council wasn't there, of not requiring minimum qualifications for department heads. So you have a person that's responsible for a $100 million budget and they don't need minimum qualifications. So what some of the people are saying, well, let's see who these department heads are. Maybe they're related to the
Good
council,
God that they're not running
friends.
a hospital.
Right.
Imagine going
Right.
into surgery.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure he has the minimum qualifications to operate on my brain.
Right. And also, another statistic for you, too, is there's been 6 councilors the last 2 years voting for a tax increase. And during the mayor's inauguration back in January, there was a protest of about a dozen people. I have an article that the local paper featured. And these same 6 councilors, it looks like, are voting in favor of taxes. And no doubt they'll probably be the same 6 that will vote for new tax. They'll bring us nearly to $17 on the residential tax rate. But here's some of the pros there, and one referred to the 6 as the slippery 6.
I like that.
But 5 are steadfast against taxes. So what can cities do that you're familiar with to repeal the taxes and have a rollback? And Brockton, when they voted for 2.5, what was the percentages you were telling me earlier?
I was surprised. I looked at the 1980 stats, and Brockton voted for Prop 2.5, 21,000 to 10,000. And on the income tax rollback, which was in 2000, which was 12 years ago, that vote was closer, but they still voted for it, 14,000 to roughly 12,000. I'm rounding off figures. Of course, Plymouth County in general is very, very conservative part of the state. Most people don't realize that, but if you look at the ballot questions, whether it's taxes or anything else, Plymouth County comes in very, very conservative.
Right.
And especially in the Bridgewater area. And, you know, I think it's unconscionable what Brockton is doing. I mean, from the figures you're giving me, it's almost as though they don't realize the revolution that's taken place around the country. I mean, all these governors are coming in and going after the health care benefits, the pension benefits of these public sector unions. It's the public sector unions that are driving this to debate. And you'd think it would have reached Brockton by now. Right.
Well, no doubt that there'll be a major economic crisis that we have to deal with going forward, not only in Brockton, but the state and the entire country.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're talking trillions of dollars in unfunded pension liabilities across the country. I was a pension fund consultant myself, and I had a lot of public pension systems as my clients. And since 1985, when they adopted the prudent person investment guidelines, and Massachusetts had a $12 billion unfunded liability, we fully diversified, the assets went forward, and they were pretty healthy, most of the city and towns being anywhere about 65 to 75% funded. But then along came the financial bust, and a lot of them went down below 50% funding. So a lot of the states, Illinois is bankrupt. Where's the money going to come to fund these pensions? It's a big question right now.
Well, you know, one of the reasons they get into the problem with the pensions was it was always easy for politicians when the labor unions, and it doesn't matter whether it's Brockton or someplace out in Wyoming, it's the same concept. these unions would pressure for wage increases. And what a lot of these politicians would say is, well, we don't have the money to give you, let's say, 5% increase. We'll give you a 3% increase, but we'll generously fund more of your pension.
Right.
Or lower the age that you qualify for it.
Right.
Something like that. That way, that cut them off the heat. They lost the heat they were getting from the unions, and they were putting off the problem when most of these politicians would no longer be in office.
Right.
And that's been the chronic problem for years.
Right.
And now all the chickens are coming home to roost.
Right. And Massachusetts, I believe, did pass a pension reform bill of recent.
They did, but it was, some parts were very good, but other
Right.
parts, for example, the MBTA, where it was so outrageous that you had guys joining the MBTA at 18 and 19 years old and retiring 20 years later when they
Right.
barely reached 40 with full pensions and health benefits for the rest of their life.
Right.
And under the new law, I think all those employees, the new employees, don't get anywhere near those benefits, but they grandfathered everybody else in.
Right.
So I forget how many employees the MBTA has, but let's say they have 5,000 or 6,000. Those guys are still there collecting those outrageous benefits.
Right. Right. And when you talk to some of the councilors and not only the councilors but politicians in general, and they try to justify these tax increases, a lot of times they use scare tactics and they come out and they tell you, well, do you want more police and firemen to be laid off? Do you get a lot of that as well in some of the communities?
Well, I mean, when we did the Prop 2.5 campaign, that's all we got was, my God, I had actually had someone stand up and point at me and saying that if Prop 2.5 passes, then babies are going to burn in buildings because there'll be no firemen to come and put out the fires in these buildings.
Right.
I mean, that's the type of rhetoric we got. Fortunately, people saw through it and voted for Prop 2.5. Another thing we pointed out during the campaign was our opposition would always, in a way, the opposition would always say, well, yes, we realize property taxes are too high. They would agree with us. But they say, we have a plan to limit or cut property taxes. And we did a study and found out that since the Depression, there had been something like 136 proposals to cut or limit taxes. Not one of them have ever got to even a roll call vote in the state legislature.
Wow.
So when people heard that, they knew it was baloney from the other side.
Right.
And they voted for Prop 2.5, and by a almost 60-40 margin.
So what's happened to the demographics of our city? As you know, Brockton is a large blue-collar city. It used to be the shoe capital of the United States, before I believe President Nixon lifted the tariffs on imports and the cheap labor overseas killed us and all the factories shut down. But with the high residential tax rate and high commercial rate, people are leaving the city in groves. They waive the residency requirements, so a public safety officer, a fireman and policeman, after serving 7 years in the city, can move to the surrounding towns. We have some department heads that aren't residents. The CFO himself has a state exemption. So you have a CFO that doesn't even Brockton that's trying to convince the council to go up on taxes so he doesn't have to bear that burden.
Has anyone factored in what the budgets have done, the increase in the budgets compared to population growth and inflation? A lot of towns do that let's say, I would imagine Brockton is probably fairly static in population or losing.
Right now, according to this census here, is about 93,000 people.
And 10 years ago, it was...
It could be a lot more if they're not
but let's say
residents.
and then inflation is only 2 or 3%. And these budgets are jumping 7 or 8%. I'm not saying Brockton's is, but you find that disparity in a lot of places.
Right.
And you've got to look into that, see why is that happening.
And the other thing the politicians will say, you know, the average market valuation, I want to point this out. Recently I had the 4 Democratic candidates with state representative on my show. We had a debate. And
that was for the Canavan seat?
No, the Creedon, Jerry
seat.
Creedon, who held that seat for years. Yeah. And there is one Republican candidate from Easton as well, and I'm going to have him on the show. But the councilors will tell you, and the city officials, that, well, the tax base isn't that great in Brockton. The average home is, the market value is a lot lower than some of these surrounding towns that have a better tax rate. But I did the math, and where these tax rates have doubled, they literally doubled from 2005, and I did my homework. I got a copy of the audit report from the city. Since 2005 to date, Brockton's residential and commercial tax rates have almost doubled over that time frame. Now, interesting enough, and correct me if I'm wrong, they do have within their authority to do property home assessments. I believe it's once a year. Ironically,
I think the state requires you to have a minimum of every 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. But I think I read the language, they can do it if they want to.
Yeah.
So they had a property devaluation when they passed the last tax increase that brought us to $16.14 per thousand. I believe they went down on the property values by only 11%. The previous year they did it, coincidentally enough, was at the height of the real estate market in 2005. So they get a lot of bang from their buck when they took those high values. Now, you and I and the viewers and everyone else knows that in this turbulent financial market, the average price of real estate probably dropped anywhere between 33 and 50% in value. So they're only lowering the value of the homes by 11%, and they double the taxes over the years. So what can we do about that? I mean, I know you have elections, and a lot of people are pushing for term limits, but they're saying that that's what elections are. But what's happening between you and myself is, I think, with the high tax rates, that the middle class is starting to disappear from our city.
Yeah.
And it shows in the voters. We've only, I'll give you a perfect idea. The state representative race, we're looking at 10% of the vote. I mean, that's unbelievable, 10%.
You mean for the primary? For
the primary. And on and it doesn't get much better in the November election. Maybe it will this year because you have a senator's race and you have a presidential race. But I just read an article that on nationwide, you're only looking at 60% of the registered voters voting.
Yeah. Massachusetts generally is higher than the national average. And I think, you know, Scott Brown is probably more concerned with that than anyone, that if Obama gets a huge vote in Massachusetts, that might hurt him, as opposed to, you know, maybe 60% coming out.
Right.
But that's a race that's tough to gauge. But you mentioned your local taxpayer group. You mentioned the fact that the council is split 6-5.
Right.
So obviously you only need a couple of councilors' results changing to flip the council. Unfortunately, that's probably, what, a year off?
That's a year off, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right on the money, because I'm hearing through the grapevine, the political gossip about that, there's going to be a lot of people running for mayor, going to be a lot of people running for city council, a lot of new faces.
Well, that's great. I think you also get the Tea Party presence. I don't know if Brockton has a chapter, but I know the Tea Parties, a lot of the activists there get involved in local races. And and on the debt issue, on the increased spending, on taxation, that's basically a Tea Party format. Is we're concerned about the debt, we're concerned about spending, we're concerned about taxes. Right.
And I also saw an interesting article the other day. They looked at all the athletic departments throughout. And Brockton, as you know, is known for City of Champions. We've had great past football players, baseball players, boxers. Matter of fact, in the other studio tonight, Peter Marciano's here. They're talking about Rocky's statue coming home finally. But almost every community on the South Shore had a user fee for the kids to play sports. And Brockton was one of the fewer cities that didn't have any user fees. Yeah. Maybe it's the demographics that, you know, the kids can't afford to pay, or maybe it's because, you know, we get such notoriety in the team and no cuts were made, and we're going up on taxes again for the $5 million shortfall that they can do that.
Well, Prop 2.5 really didn't say much about fees. Right. The only thing it said was that any fee imposed should reflect the cost of providing the service. Right. So if licensing dogs costs you $100 grand, then the fees shouldn't total more than 100 grand.
Right.
What happened in California under Prop 13 was they didn't have that language, and some departments were bringing in 300,000, using 100,000, and the other 200,000 go to the schools or the fire department or somewhere else, which is not the purpose of a fee. We really have no problems with fees as long as they're fairly allocated. And when you pay a fee, at least you'll know what you're paying,
right?
Whether it's trash pickup or water fees or something like that.
So it would have to be up to the city council to lower our assessed values on our homes and also to lower our tax rate. They set the tax rate at the urging of the CFO as well, that is the number cruncher for the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we have elections as well. And again, the vote's been very close. So the movement again is BLT, Brocktonians for Limited Taxation, and we're going to post that on our show tonight so the people can get involved with this movement. And we're also going to put all the city councilors, 11 city councilors' names and phone numbers up, and
good.
The mayor as well, to contact them, to urge them to keep our taxes down.
I think, let me ask you this. You said you've been running this show for 6 months.
Right.
Have you noticed an upsurge in activism among
Yes, I
people in
have.
Brockton?
And one of the movements was this BLT movement.
Yeah.
There's been the mayoral's protest at our inauguration, the mayor's inauguration, with a handful of people that are rebelling against the high taxes back in the old Tea Party days.
Yeah.
And it is called an outside view, so at the end of every show, we have people on our street interview, we call it. And the people, my show allows them a chance to get out and voice their opinion on camera as well. Because as you know, a lot of times they're shut out in the political process when they go in that booth, pull that curtain, and make their selection when they vote. Yep. So they get to come on the show, and we interview them, and they give their opinions, what they think about
Yeah, I
taxes.
think the tax and spenders thought that the Tea Party was just a one-shot deal. They thought 3 years ago when they all showed up on April 15th, that was the end of the movement. If anything, it's increased. And
absolutely.
And the occupiers movement, which came into prominence, a year ago, they've almost basically gone nowhere.
Right.
You see very, very little activity there, although who knows, it may resurface before the election. Mm-hmm. And I think people, I've noticed a lot of activism. This is like kind of, when I view it, as kind of a third revolution, because the first one was in 1980, the revolt against high property taxes. Then there was another one in 1990, which was a kind of revolt against Dukakis. Remember Michael Dukakis?
I remember well. Yeah.
who put in with the connivance of the state legislature, put in two of the biggest tax hikes in history in 1989 and 1990, which led to the election of Bill Weld. And also, the state Senate almost flipped. It went from 9 Republicans to 16. And Michael Creedon, I remember at the time, was a senator, and he almost lost his election.
Right.
It was very close.
Well,
and he was considered invincible.
Right. I don't know if you remember, but years ago, similar to what one protester called the Six Councils, the Slippery Six, years ago there was one movement against the Sinister Seven that opposed the mayor, and all 7 of the councils got beat.
Really?
So this could be interesting times next year in the election. Well, we're coming down to a close. I really appreciate you coming on. I commend you for your efforts and continue the cause. But we got about probably another minute or so left.
Can I tell you what our website is?
Yeah,
if
sure.
people want to join?
Absolutely.
If you want to join Citizens for Limited Taxation, we're the largest taxpayer organization in the state. You can go to our website, which is www.cltg.org. Again, it's cltg.org. You can go to PayPal. Basic membership is $30. We could always use more members.
Well, great. We'll put that up on the screen as well. And we'll be looking for Paul Revere coming on horseback. But again, I appreciate you coming on, and I don't want to be remiss. Did we leave anything else out that the people could be doing right now?
No, just go for it. Protest.
Okay.
The voters are coming. The voters are coming.
Right. Okay, Chip. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you, and
Yes.
it was very interesting.
Thanks.
Take care, and good luck going forward.